Story 1, My hair. I am a white man with naturally curly hair, and as a child, I was made fun of for having a large volume of hair. I am not of Jewish descent, and everyone told me to shave it off and get a buzz cut. Now, kids and teenagers are purposely getting perms to achieve the look I have naturally, and people my age now mock my natural hair, referring to it as broccoli hair. Without making any changes, I have managed to miss out on having a trendy hairstyle by about 10 years. Story 2. Being able to listen to popular 1980s music on current hits radio and MTV actually playing music rather than reality shows. But at least I got the former from Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Story 3. I should have been born in the early part of the 20th century. I would have liked to have fought in the Spanish Civil War. Story 4. 10 years too late for the edgy, grungy bar scene in New York City. I would have loved to experience New York City from my childhood as an adult, but it is all gone now. Story 5. The United Kingdom rave scene. I was only 12 in 1992. I would have loved to have been enjoying the experience in a Wiltshire field instead. Story 6. The prices of houses and lots. As an adult struggling financially and wanting to buy a house, I wish I had been born when the prices of houses and lots were much cheaper than they are today. Story 7. The hippie movement. I was a baby when it was happening. I would have loved to have been a part of it. Story 8. Born in the mid-1990s. 10 years too late to enter the housing market. If I had my current level of income and savings in 2015, I would probably have a 7-figure net worth right now. Story 9. To see Roe versus Wade. The United States Supreme Court overturned state bans on abortion live. Too bad I saw the United States going backward on this one. Story 10. Woodstock. As a hippie born in the wrong era, it always saddens me that I missed both the original Woodstock because I wasn't born yet. My dad also missed it because he was only 14 at the time. I also missed the 1999 Woodstock because I was pregnant and poor. Story 11. Woodstock. It's a wild question, because that's something I've been saying since my teenage years. I would have loved to have been there. Story 12. I wanted to post the phrase, born too late to explore the world, too early to explore the galaxy, but just in time to explore memes. I was born too late to explore the peak of the 1990s. It's not the same as the early 2000s. Story 13. The Mother Draft and the Unfortunate War in Vietnam. Not 10 years too late, but enough. Watching the draft lottery on television was interesting when people selected because of their birthday could actually be dead in a year. Story 14. I am basically a solipsist, so I do not believe any of you exist. It is only me. I live in a simulator, and I love it. Chaos, anarchy, blood. I love it. I do not know. I guess if I had been born 10 years earlier, I would have witnessed more chaos on television and be even more affected by the actions of those in power today against their own people. Who knows, though? A 10-year difference is not really a lot, you know? Story 15. Seeing my football team Leeds United win their last league title in 1992 was unforgettable. However, I did get to experience being 10 years old at the Millennium, which was fun as a child. We had the best television shows, we enjoyed Pokemon and World Wrestling Entertainment at its peak, and we had both the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation 2. What a time to be a kid. Story 16. I guess the golden age of classic rock. I grew up listening to bands a good 10 years before my time, and by the time I was old enough to go to gigs or concerts, my heroes were usually deceased, retired, or occasionally still performing but very much past their peak. Story 17. Late 1970s disco funk music scene. I used to DJ disco house in the early 2000s. Lately, I have been checking out a 1970s funk night event. It is just so much fun. Story 18. Black metal. I'm 96, so 10 years earlier would be a banger, and Grand Theft Auto San Andreas on release day with a PlayStation, hell yeah. Story 19. To be considered a true millennial instead of this millennial concept, I was born at the tail end of the 1990s, but I still remember all of the technological and societal advances. However, according to society, I am not a millennial even though I was born before the millennium. Story 20, half of it, and I would say the 2004 Olympics. I missed such an honor for my country, and I fear I may never see it again. Story 21. Affording a house is a possibility. It would have put me at 30 years old in 2013 instead of 20, so I might have been able to buy one before the prices increased. Story 22. I remember hearing that the Beatles split up. I was very young, but I remember my sibling being upset about it. I would have loved to see the rise of the Beatles. Story 23. Seeing good musicians in their prime, the things I would do to see System of a Down or Depeche Mode in the early 1990s. Story 24. The second summer of love. But I would also need to be born in the United Kingdom, so I am pretty happy to have been born in 1980. Story 25. Actively experiencing the fall of the wall as a teenager and seeing my life change from what it was before and how everything turned out afterward. I was unfortunately too young to really notice the change, except that suddenly every other girl in kindergarten had Barbie dolls, and the local grocer was suddenly called a supermarket. I would have loved to learn more about what life was like in the German Democratic Republic, but only with the knowledge of it ending eventually. I would not want to imagine as a 14-year-old that this is all there is. In a way, I am glad I was a teenager instead in the golden age of the internet. It opened up way more opportunities for me personally and professionally than being born 10 years earlier would have. Story 26. I am Latino, so the reggaeton wave takeover of music. I am 34, so I wish I were much younger to really enjoy it. Story 27. To watch peak boxing, I love Floyd Mayweather. I never got to watch any of his fights besides the Conor McGregor one. Story 28. Everything, man, I was born in the wrong generation. Older music is the bee's knees, my friend, and today's music is the very bad, you know? Story 29. Nicholas Galitzine. Edit. Whoops, that would have to be 10 years too early in order to fit, wouldn't it? Although technically, he is not that much younger. Story 30. Flower power. I would have liked the hippie lifestyle. Free love, psychedelics, and living in a commune sound amazing. Story 31. Getting to experience the Atari 2600 and Nintendo Entertainment System when they were the newest thing. I grew up in the Super Nintendo Entertainment System era, but I kind of wish I was born 10 years earlier as I would get so many years of great gaming. I'm making up for lost time now and have an emulator where I can try every Nintendo Entertainment System game, but imagining growing up with the Nintendo Entertainment System and growing up in the 1980s going to arcade sounds so cool. I definitely glamorized the 1980s. Living through them or the 1970s sounds peak and would also mean that early adulthood would be before everyone had phones in their pockets, which was just such a better world, at least for me. Story 32. To describe the 1990s and early 2000s, I'm a 90s baby. The late 1990s had a vibe that I think is unparalleled, even though I wasn't fully conscious during that time. Story 33. Being a Generation X individual. I actually only missed Generation X by 3 years, but being born in 1973 would have actually given me a couple of years to remember it. Story 34. I really want to experience life in the late 1990s and early 2000s. It seems like life was better then, excluding two tragedies, that is. Story 35. Clubbing and raving in the years prior to the millennium. I managed to get 5 years of Helter Skelter, Dreamscape, and Slammin' Vinyl in before Y2K. Story 36. I was born in 2010, so it feels like I am at least 15 years too early. Being a kid in the early 2000s sounds so cool. However, the thing I really wish I could have experienced is being a kid in the 1980s and 1990s. That just sounds so amazing. Story 37. My parents love me. Not a joke, my parents had trouble conceiving for so long that when I came along, they resented me because it was long after they had stopped trying since they had my sister. They were not happy about having another girl either. Story 38. I was born 10 years too late to visit the location of my physical incarnational birth with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, but that should not stop you from sending me Reddit gold to make up for my lack of foresight or hindsight. Story 39. I will never be able to experience going on the Horizons ride in Epcot. It is now mission space, which is not nearly as enjoyable, and Horizons had a message about peace and advancement through understanding. It closed the year before I was born, and I will always be disappointed that I will never get the chance to ride it. Story 40. To deploy and serve in the Middle East. I spent over 10 years in the military, but I did not have a single deployment. I joined in 2011. Story 41. Being able to get into the housing market. I mean, I still could have, but I had a very short window and was too young to see it or know it. Story 42. I was born in 1974. I enjoyed the 1980s as a kid and the 1990s as a teenager. It was awesome. In my opinion, the 1990s were the peak of society. Story 43. I was born in 2002 as an Algerian girl. I really wish I had been born in the 40s. I think it is so special and exciting to experience every moment of the revolution period. War, struggle, madness, death, fashion, language, everything was amazing. I am a person of the 50s. Story 44. Being able to mine Bitcoin at its inception was an interesting opportunity. I tried to get my IT executive dad to set up some miners since we had a literal room of gaming PCs gathering dust. I was only 9, so he didn't really take me seriously or look into it. Knowing how he is with data retention and security, we would have absolutely been millionaires, but we probably would have sold well before any major peaks. Story 45. I actually really like the era I was born into and love living when I am living now. There are a lot of things to complain about, such as living in historic times, but the more we look into the recent past, the more I realize we were always headed in this direction. The West just had so much prosperity that it was easier to ignore. Story 46. Human papillomavirus vaccine. They raised the age to 45 when I was 46. I guess that is only 1 year, but I would have had it if I were younger. Not that I have human papillomavirus or anything, but it would have been nice to not have to worry as much about it. Story 47. The emergence of the peak rave scene in the United Kingdom. I have a friend who was a teenager during that era. He made a career in event management based on his raving days. Story 48. Born too late to have an income to invest in Bitcoin. If I were born 10 years earlier, I would have gotten a job earlier and probably would have invested in Bitcoin, Apple, Google, and Microsoft. Story 49. Born in 65 when camcorders and video recorders were not really a thing yet. I would love to hear myself talking with my brother and sister when we were 3, 4, and 5, just to hear our little voices. Story 50. Everyone is partying like there is no tomorrow in clubs. Now you have to navigate around groups that are just standing still. Story 51. The grunge era. I would have loved to have been a teenager rather than a younger child in the early 1990s. Early 2000s high school me was always blasting Nirvana, Alice in Chains, and Pearl Jam. Story 52. 1980s rock and roll artists, non-commercial bush doof, real backpacking, strong purchasing power, and paying off a small short mortgage if you worked since your teens and have a solid stable job in your 20s as a fully independent person. Story 53. The 1990s. I was born just before the year 2000, so technically I was born in the last century at least. I genuinely relate to many more things from the 1990s and early 2000s than I do with the 2010s and 2020s. Everything nowadays just seems to increasingly decline. Story 54. The pre-social media internet age. I was born in the mid-1990s, and the internet was still starting off then. Story 55. Being able to talk about retro video games without people saying, "Well, how would you know? You weren't even born yet." As if I wasn't so poor that I had a Super Nintendo and PlayStation as my only gaming consoles until 2016. Story 56. Participating in Beatlemania firsthand. Going to the concerts for all the great rock bands of the 1970s. Story 57. Cheap cars. All the golden oldies are mega bucks nowadays. Back in 2012, I was 12, showing my old man AE86S for under $1,000 running and driving. Now those same cars are $15,000 to $60,000. Story 58. Lack of social media and reduced cell phone usage when the internet was a better place. People were more civil when discussing certain topics, and individuals seemed less foolish. Story 59. Polio. People worked hard to come up with a vaccine to eliminate that terrible disease. People believed the science and essentially wiped it out. Given the way the current administration views science and vaccines, it may be joining the resurgence alongside measles and others. Story 60. Maybe in 10 years it will be too late to be a 1990s hacker, typing furiously on a clunky cathode ray tube monitor while a green glowing screen flashes. Story 61. Born in 2006. I was not conscious when two of my favorite bands, No Use for a Name and the Swellers, were around. It is quite a sad realization. Story 62. To remember September 11th. My 11th grade history teacher said that we were one of the first classes that would not have been old enough to remember September 11th, so we have no stakes in the wars in the Middle East or why we keep learning about those few hours. I loved his class because he tried his best to be real with us. Story 63. Being in the old world military where you might still find yourself needing muscles to kill the enemy. Now it seems it is full-bore technology, and my large Northern European body is not of much value when it comes to protecting my family. I should have been in chess club, not at sports practice. Had I been born 10 years earlier, I would have been in the military after September 11th, 2001, fought with muscle in the war on terror, and I would most likely be much better off in life right now, financially and skillfully. I would have gotten paid to pick up the new age technology training in the military, had the best teachers and access for it, and been a brother to someone who would teach me after I got out. Story 64. When I first found out about Bitcoin, it was dirt cheap. I begged my parents to let me buy a bunch with my pocket money, and they said no. I was 8. If I had been born exactly 10 years prior, I would have been a millionaire by now. Story 65. This is going to sound weird, but music is my life. I was a solitary, sickly child and obsessed with music. I was not allowed to go to concerts until I was 11 and just missed out on huge favorites like Queen, Led Zeppelin, and Pink Floyd. But my number one obsession was Kiss. I lived within walking distance from the Forum in Inglewood, California, and would beg to go. I did not get to see them until the Lick It Up tour, their first tour without makeup. Story 66. Owning a home, going to college without crippling debt, transitioning into adulthood without becoming severely mentally ill. Story 67. Grunge. I love it. Imagine how much more I would love it if I went through my formative years when it was at its peak. Story 68. I could have bought stock in Ferrari at not even $60 per share. It's now worth about $500 per share. I did buy less than half a dozen shares when it was just above $200 per share, though. But between you and me, Ferrari designs haven't been the same since they dropped Pininfarina. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.